So I am, where are we? I'm sorry, I'm trying to find where I stopped with my last mini-sode. Okay, so, no, we need to go back. I think we're here. And I gotta find where I am. I'm sorry, I should have been prepared, but that's in a perfect world. Okay, so, looking at this, okay, so just because we have this understanding that Reconstruction is over in 1877, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is an immediate stop to voting and office holding by Black citizens. So we have Black men serving in Congress even during the 1880s and 1890s. But as time goes by, we get more and more restriction of political rights. And it isn't until the 1990s that the number of Southern Black legislatures actually get to the level that they had reached just post-Reconstruction. So as we are seeing Black men excluded more and more from politics and political life, they look to areas like law, business, or even the church to find opportunities for success. I mean, it seems like it makes sense. We are humans. We like to, we want to do our best usually. I don't know about Jackson. We try to do our best and we want to see success. We don't want to sit there and keep doing something that is not going to be beneficial for us. So the fact that, we have Black men now kind of going towards, I guess what you would call the private sector, you have to step in now into kind of a public life are Black women. They actually form the National Association of Colored Women in 1896. And this is to unite some like smaller kind of like regional organizations under one banner, if you will, and get a little bit more of this, I guess, kind of concentrate the power into one organization. These women are fighting for not only rights for Black people in general, but also for women's rights. And a lot like we see in the suffrage movement, this movement kind of starts within our urban middle class women. Female activists they have this kind of like fake it till you make it idea where basically if you show these crazy white people, if you show them that you are not a second class citizen, they won't want to treat you like a second class citizen anymore. They want to be seen as respectable. So they're like, look, we are just like you. We do the same kind of charity stuff you do. We do it in our own community. We want the same things you do. So there's no sense in you treating us as if we don't deserve it or we aren't worthy of it. In the face of a lot of this kind of voting fraud and violence that is, it's 100% organized to intimidate this community. White Southerners are trying to either intimidate Black Southerners into not participating politically, or will, in a few years, just out and out completely restrict all of their voting activity. But even in, the face of this, we still have Black Southerners who are saying, no, we're worth it, we're better than this, and we're not going to let you bully us out of our constitutional rights. In some states, we have a Republican Party that is still viable. It doesn't get defeated. And in fact, even in Virginia, we have Black Republicans and Democrats who are anti-Redeemer. Democrats, they work together actually and form kind of a coalition in order to, they call it the readjuster movement because they want to do something with their state budget. This group stays in charge from 1879 to 1883, so that's not an insubstantial amount of time. But our Democrats are increasingly threatened and increasingly paranoid. So they are, I mean, this kind of stuff is just fuel to the fire of disenfranchisement. Between 1890 and 1806, every single southern state is looking for ways to destroy the vote in the Black community. Even though we have the 15th Amendment that is supposed to protect, voting, Southern legislatures find a way to kind of work around that, and they come up with really just petty laws to say, oh, well, I'm sorry, you're not able to vote. One of the favorite tools was the poll tax, and this is where if you want to register to vote, you have to pay a tax. And oh, look at that, you're super poor. Hate that for you. There's also literacy tests, so you have to be able to read something and say what it is. You have to demonstrate that you have a quote thing of the state constitution. You also have 6 states that pass grandfather clauses. They're so named because it says that all these new stupid little petty laws that they put into place, you don't have to abide by those. Like, those don't apply to you as long as your grandfather was a voting citizen before 1860. And let's think, who was not able to vote before 1860? Oh, yes, right. That's the plan. And honestly, this is such an obvious violation of the Constitution that the Supreme Court actually throws out grandfather clauses. They're like, you cannot do this, even if we are super racist old white dudes in black Harry Potter robes. Like, we can't even give you a pass on this one. Like, do better. So white leaders, they are insisting that they are simply responding to a need to clean up politics. Because it's just so immoral, and we don't want to have, we don't want to have this group of people become the majority. We don't want them to take control when it's like, but that's what you're doing. Like, you're fine with you doing it. Why would it not be good for them? That whole weird phrase, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, I hate geese, so like I don't understand why someone wanted to reference those murder chickens. Okay. They have this false narrative that is trotted out throughout this time period and well into, oh God, there are people that say it today. But they're saying that there is a threat from Black people, Black communities, and that we have to protect our racial purity or our white communities from this aggressive desire of Black people to subjugate us. It's like, I think you are remembering what you did, or you're thinking out loud, or I don't think you understand what reality is. So even if you think about some of these requirements that are put in place, there are poor white people that are unable to do this. Like, they're not able to pay the poll tax. They're not able to understand the Constitution. They're not able to read. Literacy rates, they're not very high. So sometimes, like, they're just kind of allowed to, they're like, oh, no, you can definitely read, wink, wink. But it also excludes a lot of these people. So we have this this kind of like elite group of people. And when I say elite, I don't mean that in like a positive sense, just a, specific small number. They're the people that are allowed to vote. And as long as you keep these people as the only people being allowed to vote, then they're the ones that are going to stay in power. Once you get in power, you do everything you can to stay in power. Um, that's a Marx thing, and while all of his, thoughts weren't completely right, I feel like that's an observation that is very applicable to most political systems. The people who are in power will do what they have to do in order to stay in power. This disenfranchisement of about 80,000 white voters. This leads to the rise of a generation of what are called demagogues. So these are Southern demagogues, and they figure out real quick that the key to their success is racist appeals. As long as you can keep one group of people turned against another, they cannot unite against you. Divide them in half, appeal to one half of them, and that one half will be happy to join you and your friends in subjugating the others. So by 1940, only about 3% of adult Black Southerners are registered to vote. Previous to this, remember, under the age of Jackson, we have a broadening of who was allowed to vote. So property qualifications fall away. It's not necessarily this educated, I always think of them as like the founding fathers class. Like that's not what we're looking at under Andrew Jackson. He wanted to allow as many people as possible to vote. And so our property qualifications go away, but right here, this is the contraction of that. No more. So for all these people who want to put in place like limits on voting, or requirements on voting. So you have to be able to show this particular ID, or you have to stand on your head and be able to recite the national anthem of Poland. Like whatever it is, a lot of them think of themselves as Jacksonian leaders. But that limitation of who is allowed to vote, that is anti-Jacksonian. The man is a enigma wrapped in a riddle because he was a heavy unionist. Even though he was a Southerner, he was the kind of the architect behind the Trail of Tears, and then he adopted a native boy and raised him as his own in Tennessee. Like this, Jackson, he holds together the Union when John C. Calhoun is throwing his like hissy fit over a tariff. He holds together the Union by just sheer and utter bullheadedness. Like the man is just like, I will come down there and I will personally hang all of you if you do not pay the taxes you're supposed to pay under the tariff. And they knew he would do it. That's the scary part. That's why they all agreed with him. So at this, as we're looking at disenfranchisement post Reconstruction, in 1891, our Senate it defeats a proposal that wanted to protect voting rights on a federal level for Black citizens in the South. And the Supreme Court, other than, kind of saying, look, you, with your grandfather clause, you said the quiet part out loud. So we're going to have to give you a slap on the wrist for that one. But all these other, limits that are put in place, they're 100% approved by the Supreme Court. Nothing else that has to do with disenfranchisement, that they're fine, according to the Supreme Court. According to our 14th Amendment, any state that deprives male citizens of the vote, they're supposed to lose some of their representation in Congress. But as we know, many times things are violated because it's easier to ignore what is happening in front of you. Southern congressmen have a lot of power because while their census populations seem to be very large, the people that they are representing in actuality is a very small percentage of those people. So if you were in the South and you were in power, you had a lot of power. You had more power than I think modern people understand. Yeah. Okay. So if we are now going to look at segregation, it's segregation time for our post Reconstruction horrible people because I don't know. I can't think of anything funny right now because it's just so depressing. 1890s, widespread segregation. Not only was it like the custom, but it is also the legal practice. In the pre-Civil War North, we definitely had segregation. I mean, in the post-Civil War North, there is segregation. It's not necessarily de jure segregation. It's more de facto, but it's there. You have cases all the time where, in order to make a school district integrated in like Boston, it's somewhere bizarre like that, they have to bus kids from different areas. But in the South, we have public facilities that are being segregated now. We have a Supreme Court that kind of supports that. In 1883, we have what are referred to as the civil rights cases, and this is when the Supreme Court invalidates the Civil Rights Act of 1875. This was the legal apparatus that was put in place to prohibit racial discrimination. And so with our civil rights cases, the Supreme Court is like, oh no, that's cool. We're fine with that. 1896, this is where we have Plessy v. Ferguson, and this is the separate but equal doctrine. It's a case in Louisiana where a man who was, I believe he is 1/8 African American. If I had the picture in front of me, which I don't, and it's not on your screen, but you could Google it. If you saw a picture of him, you would not say that this is a African American man. Like he looked like a white man. He was in a train car that was supposed to be for white passengers only. And he sues because he's like, I don't know, this is stupid. I am not going to a place to sit in a car simply because you think I should. This was in Louisiana. Hold on, let me make sure I'm telling this right. Yeah, so he was supposed to move. This is what's called the people who want to challenge cases in the Supreme Court. They have what are called test cases. And so these test cases, the law is violated on purpose in order to try to get this case to the Supreme Court so then they can challenge the law. So Homer Plessy, he refuses to move. We have super racist dudes that are against it. He's the attorney for the Citizens Committee, which was a group of black people who lived in New Orleans. They hire a guy who was a judge in North Carolina during Reconstruction, and he is known to be like very anti-Klan. He says that citizenship is national and it knows no color. He says that racial segregation violates the 14th Amendment that guarantees equal protection. But then the court upholds the Louisiana law that requires separate facilities. And John Marshall Harlan is the one dissenting vote. So this was not like a close call. This was like one dude that was sitting there going, are you smoking something that you did not share with me? Because no. In his dissent, he says our Constitution is colorblind. Segregation springs from white people's conviction that they're the dominant race, which is a phrase that is used in the decision that is written by the majority. He says it violates the principle of equal liberty. He's the lone voice going, why are you all insane? So what do we think is going to happen after Plessy is passed down? Yes, all of that, absolutely. Everything is segregated. Harlan in his dissent, he says that it is a thin disguise to say that you have to have equality, because if something is separate, it is inherently unequal. Like, it's not the same. You can't, anyway. So it's yet another tool used in order to put down, a black population that was thriving and flourishing during Reconstruction, while you had the federal government in place saying, you must do right, you crazy people. And as soon as they left, they were like, nah, we're good. In 1900, there is no public high school for black students in the entire South. Not one. And that is in the century. It's in the century in which I was born. Like, it's not that far away. We have white people obsessed with white domination, keep races apart, blah, 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 blah. It's like, come on, man, why can't everyone be cool? We have social etiquette that evolves to figure this out. Your textbook points to an instance of a sociologist who studied the turn of the century South and reported that in places of business, black people had to stand back and wait until white people had been served. They could not raise their voices or act assertively in the presence of white people, and they have to give way on the streets. In stores, white people, but not black people, are allowed to try on clothing. So it's just as ridiculous and mind-numbingly insane as we would expect it to be. And not to leave out other people that are discriminated against, because that's something that America's real good at. It affects these other minority groups. So in some parts of Mississippi, we have Chinese laborers who are brought to work in the fields after the Civil War, because we're like, well, said we can't enslave those people. Let's try a different group. We have, in California, there are 3 separate school systems. You have a white school, a black school, and a Chinese school established. We also, that says that's still in Mississippi. My bad. In California, we have Black, Hispanic, and American Indian children. They're actually educated with white children. But wait, there's more. There is a state law that requires a separate school for children of, quote, this is not my word, but it is a quote, of Mongolian or Chinese descent. That is California. No, that's not how you say it. California. That's California. In Texas and California, usually people that we would have, well, they would probably classify themselves, honestly, as Hispanic or of Latina, they're considered legally white, but they're still, still excluded from places because, of course. Are you kidding me? No, you can't come in here. So here we are. Compare this is a black school. So we're going to see this picture, and then we are going to look at a white school on the next slide. And they're both elementary schools in South Boston, Virginia. All right, so here we go. There's the one. This is the black school. And these are at the same time. Like, they're in play at the same time. They're educating children at the same time. Let's do it again. Black school, white school. Yeah. I see how they fulfilled that whole separate but equal thing. This is not a fun topic to talk about, yet here we are. Black people who decided they were going to stand up for their rights and challenge the system. They are fighting not just an uphill battle, but, we know how this is going to end up. The book says in every year between 1883 and 1905, more than 50 people, the vast majority of them black men, were lynched in the South. And the book defines it, in case you don't know what it is, that says being murdered by a mob. It continues well into the 20th century. And by mid-century, the total number of victims since 1880 had reached nearly 5,000. 5,000. Okay. Some lynchings were secret. Others were a big old party. I would prefer not to speak on this because it is just astonishingly offensive and horrible and awful. So I will instead talk about Ida B. Wells, who writes extensively about the practice of lynching. She was born a slave in Mississippi in 1862. She becomes a school teacher. She writes an essay that condemns the lynching of 3 black men in Memphis. And this is when a mob destroys her newspaper and she has to stay out of the city. She moves north. She becomes an anti-lynching crusader. Your textbook says she bluntly insisted that given the conditions of Southern blacks, the United States had no right to call itself the land of the free. This is one of the most depressing things to research, and it's one of those things that you just can't believe that people otherwise would call themselves good people and still do these horrific things. So we have this funny little thing called the politics of memory. And this is where our lost cause narrative comes into play, because it's really difficult to look at people who you're now supposed to kind of restore your relationship with and know that they would have killed you if they could have. So we have to start kind of glossing over what happens. So veterans have these reunions and their public memorials. Southern women start the Daughters of the Confederacy, or Confederate Soldiers of America, Confederate Veterans, whatever, I don't know. You can still see tombstones in some really old cemeteries that say CSA on them. That means that they fought for the Confederate States of America. It starts to be as like this kind of silly little war between a family. Like, this is a family. It was a war of brother against brother. Both sides fought nobly for a cause that they believed in. States' rights, as we are probably far too familiar with in the South, hearing states' rights, and preservation of the Union for the North. Slavery is put to the back burner. It's kind of relegated to this minor thing that happens during the war, and it's not really the war's cause. And Reconstruction was a terrible time. There was no order. It wasn't until the North moved out and decided they weren't going to punish us anymore that the South rose again. No, the South is not going to rise again. It's just insane. It's very, very crazy. If I can find some, I'll find the textbooks that talk about how the enslaved people were happy, woo-hoo-hoo, and Reconstruction was so bad for everybody. Gone with the Wind is a really good example of this kind of propaganda, but I would even say it's not quite as bad as it could be. So the participation of black soldiers in the war is completely glossed over. Like, this is not the thing that anyone wants to hear about. It is bad publicity, and we're not going to talk about it. When I went to Gettysburg for this conference this past summer, the guy, we were able to do specific kind of hikes. And so the one that I did was Pickett's Charge. And the tour guide that we had, he's really good. Like, he knew more than I knew. And he was talking about how at one point, like, he had worked at Gettysburg, and this very old man came up to him and was telling him about how I don't know, this would have been it couldn't have been 75th anniversary. 50th anniversary, we'll go with that. I don't know, whatever the last anniversary of, or reunion or whatever that they had at Gettysburg was, there were all of these like super old men who, there's like no medical care back then. So they're all in just like weird medical shape. It is July when they're having this like meet and greet or whatever. And the people who are organizing it are terrified that they're going to have all these old Confederate and Union veterans just like keeling over on the battlefield. And so what they do, they enlist like as many people as they can to volunteer to basically make sure that whatever soldier you're assigned to, make sure he does not die. And this man that was talking to our tour guide, he was a Boy Scout at that point in time for, the local troop or whatever in Gettysburg. And so they assigned him one of these veterans. And they were like, he was like 1,000,000 years old. And this is what this little boy did, is he followed this, I can't remember if it was a Union or a Confederate veteran, but this man who was like older than time itself, as he and his buddies like do this, reenactment of the charge up Cemetery Ridge. And they said that so they actually have these like photo ops, and it would have the Confederate, soldiers on one side, and have the Union ones on the other, and they would like shake hands like, ooh, yay, we're all happy now. And one of the guys is actually quoted as saying, because they had like afterwards, they were gonna have like this little reception under the trees because it's so nice. And there was like a big barrel of whiskey that someone had donated. And the Confederate guys are like, hey man, if we'd have known that like the whiskey was here, like we might have actually won this battle. It's a folksy a folksy story that, completely undermines the fact that the Mississippi Articles of Secession are like state slavery. Like that's it. That's why we're leaving. Slavery, always slavery. That's it. That's the story. Fun facts. All right, so I am gonna stop here because I just am. And then our next one. This is such a long chapter. It really does cover a ton. We're about to go into colonialism and our racist cartoons. I guess the theme of this chapter is just like racism. And then in the progressive era for chapter 18. So I am stopping in the textbook on 697, and the end of the chapter is 718. So I don't know, like I have zero fun things to say other than, I don't know, maybe like stop listening to me because I don't even have my own life together.